Hello everyone, welcome. In this video we're going to talk about EQuivocate by Newfangled Audio. It's an auditory graphic EQ. So it's an equalizer, but it's a very peculiar one, and it's probably the best plugin for us to talk about the male scale and why Newfangled Audio takes, in all of their plugins, the same approach in deconstructing the frequency spectrum and then operating, processing it, and then reconstructing it, right? It's kind of peculiar that we always see these 26, this number 26, the 26 bands that we can change, but it gets up to 26 bands that we can work on. And EQuivocate is probably the best incarnation of this common denominator that the plugins by Newfangled Audio have. So in 1930, or in the 30s, give or take, scientists and engineers found out that the human hearing is only capable of discerning or of understanding the existence of two different sounds when these two sounds are far enough in frequency from each other. So when they're too close together, below a certain threshold in hertz, our hearing has a hard time understanding that it's actually two sounds. It almost feels like it's one a little bit more complicated and elaborated sound. When the distance is far enough, we perceive the two different sounds. And they built a sort of scale, which is the male scale in the end, that covers 26 areas with specific crossover points that are pretty much what we could subdivide the human hearing into, which is really fascinating if we think that it's not like saying 26 bits, because when you say bits, you involve dynamics, we know that, but it's kind of, we're not digital beings, but it's funny to think that our hearing, which, as you remember, goes from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz in terms of audible range, is actually 26, different areas or hotspots in which we are capable of perceiving sounds. And they subdivided 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz in these 26 hotspots. And if we play like 26 different tones exactly centered in these, hotspots, we will perceive all of the 26 of them. But if we enter a 27th tone and we place it somewhere in there, it will always be somehow in between two areas in which our hearing would be capable of understanding one tone, but it's going to have a hard time distinguishing two. So this principle became what Newfangled Audio thought would be super interesting to operate on audio. And, the results, the way the plugins sound, kind of prove that they are right. So if we take a look at the interface, we can clearly see that the 26 bands are put in front of us and they occupy most of the real estate, right? But there's common elements that we can talk about right off the bat. There's presets you can load, save, compare, open the manual. There's settings, which only have the visualization and rendering for OpenGL, and the skins, Newfangled, Modern, and Twin Turbo, which we said, I like Modern, I'm going to keep it at that. Active and bypass, which is typical bypass button, and then input and output meters, left and right, with an input gain that I can adjust and the output level that I can set to auto, and I can engage and disengage the auto gain. Or I can set it to manual and I can enter my own values, in dB. These are pretty common in all of Newfangled Audio's plugins. And then in the center, this auditory filter bank, which would be how many bands do we want to use in here. And it can go from 1, which is a 1-band thing, just a main leveler would be curious to use it. 1 band for the whole frequency spectrum, up to 26, which is what the male scale employed. But we can also set it to custom, and this will allow us, as you can see, to fine-tune or change or customize, obviously, the crossover points of all of the bands we've got selected. So if it's 26, we have 26, actually 25 probably, crossover points, and it's actually 26, I think. If not, I'm going to count them. No, I'm not going to do that. Anyway, if we set it, for example, to 5, we get, the 5 crossovers. We can solo each of them to listen to what that specific band does. We can add with plus or minus, insert or remove after the selected bands, an additional band, up again to 26. and we can engage and disengage each band. Then there's a gain value, which is exactly as you think, like it's a gain value change for that crossover, and the crossover point, which if set to mel, is automatically applied by the plugin, but it can be moved and then we shift to custom, right? We can display input meters and output meters, so each band actually has meters going on. As you can see, and they're placed left and right of the actual bands. Very easy to see if we're like going past what the initial input audio metering was or not. And then there's a range of operation, and this alters the vertical axis of the whole EQ. So if we go 24, our maximum scale, you see, goes to plus 24 and minus 24. But it's quite cool that we can go negative. And if we go negative, now up is minus and down is plus. Very weird, but it's reversed. Why would this be useful? You can set something to add stuff you don't like, and then you can reverse the effect and also determine how much you want the reversed effect to be, strong. So this is quite nice. I usually keep it at 12 or something like that, but sometimes you can go more, and then you feel you might have overdone it, and then you compensate for it, right? So this is quite nice. The match EQ allows you to take something from the sidechain channel in this plugin, and by using a sidechain signal, match the sidechain signal through the match EQ. You just engage these while audio is playing, and EQuivocate will listen to the sidechain signal and match the EQ of the track it's put on. It's inserted on. And it can go from 100% to minus 100%, depending on whether you want to have a completely sort of complementary kind of tone, or you want to go and effectively match. So remember, it has to be turned on. The bands become yellow, so you can't touch them. It will be all automatic. And it will follow the bands you have. So 5 or 26, they're all going to move. We're going to see that in a second. After that, there's reset gains, which obviously resets the whole gains in case you don't want to do it by hand, because 26 bands takes a lot of time. And draw curve allows you to say, for example, I just want to draw something like this. You just drag your mouse around and you'll be able to just draw it. It seems a little bit too optimistic and coarse. It actually works really well to sort of paint the tonality of your sound. That would be the term. So we reset gains. After that, it's done. There's really sort of nothing else but this EQ area in the male scale, which is like the core of Newfangled Audio's approach. Now we're going to use it, we're going to see it in action, and we're going to try and solve some problems that are typical to mixing with just EQuivocate. Nothing but that. Let's go. Okay, so in this song, I just want to get a rough idea of what EQuivocate sounds like. So I instantiated one on the drums channel. It's a drum machine. And we're just going to put it in bypass and listen to what it sounds like this way. And I'm just going to play with 5 bands and, raise and lower the faders and solo them, just to get an idea of what the plugin feels like. It feels pretty natural, and it feels kind of weird in comparison to a regular equalizer. You can hear you're altering the spectrum, but it's always very organic in a way, but not AI organic, like it's not calculated for us. It's still a tool, but it's really nice and really, really clean. I can see why in 26 bands some people have employed these already in mastering situations because it's easy to pinpoint areas in which maybe you don't like the mix or stuff and you just want to retouch what that frequency range of the hotspot sounds like, and this just gives you a better, more natural feeling result because of this male scale approach. So I'm not going to use it on the drums yet, maybe, but there's a problem I want to try and address in this session that has no plugins whatsoever, and it's the bass parts. So here, just because the song is raw and there's no outboard that we used to track and mix, there's actually a lot of bass tracks that play together, and there's a lot of frequency clashing in the low area, I would say. So let's listen to which bass parts are playing. They're all gonna be this magenta kind of purple area here. I like how the Poly6 is lagging sometimes. The timing is, I don't know. Well, that's what ended up on the record. So I think Poly6 2 and Samso are kind of together. And here we should really decide who plays the subs. But there's Poly6 1 and PPG. I think bass is not playing. Luckily for us, it's only 4 basses. It is. So it's 4 basses with PPG kind of low, okay. It has this belly sound. This is kind of a rubbery low mid kind of sound. This is more all out, and then there is the buzz from Samso. Without having a clear idea of what the arrangement was or is, there's really just grasping at straws, right? So I'm gonna start from Poly6 2 and Samso, and I'm gonna instantiate EQuivocate on all of the 4 tracks, and then I'm gonna open the interface for the 2 that interest me now. So I really don't know if I want to work with 26 bands. It's a little bit too much. I'm gonna try 5. And if anything, this is gonna be better for us to understand how things work. So we got Poly6 2, this kind of belly sound, bell-like sound. And then we got Samso, which has a lot of highs, which is probably the complementary part. So we're gonna try and do it, pretty simply, just going highs for Samso and something that complements Poly6 2. But I want to hear what the crossovers do first, because the 20 kilohertz is usually very, very high. So it might not grab onto stuff I want. I actually can't hear anything here, so let me try the other band. Okay, so it sounds very sowy and sharp, but there's not a lot of stuff going on in here. So I'm gonna just go 24 dBs and I'm gonna crank it up and see if I can make it a little bit brighter somehow. So this band is either me being completely deaf or it's not really having that much of an impact. So I'm probably gonna cheat and lower this. Okay, it's more useful to me this way. I could increment the bands, obviously, but let's try and keep it simple because 5 bands is plenty already. So this sound, we know now it's set in a way that it's gonna work for us. And we could reset gains, see how useful that button is. It just resets the gain values. And we're gonna listen to both the Poly6 and the Samso, and I'm gonna try and make one sound out of them. The thing is, I don't want the lows to be really, really prominent in Samso because I think even if they're not playing together, because I made sure that the Poly62 was loppy enough on purpose, as professionals do. But there is a lot of lows in play, and there's a lot of other synthesizers playing. So, let's try and address that so we have a coherent, a little bit more punchy bass. They don't bother me together, otherwise I would have never written such an amazing piece. But I gotta say, when I lower the Sam So on the right, I can kind of hear that the picture is getting more in focus. And when I think of the song that I know and all the arrangement and the tracks we've done, it's gonna be better, a little bit leaner. There's a lot of stuff going on. So we need a centered force in this mix. So this already worked really nicely. And I'm gonna try and do sort of a complementary work on the two and just try and see where we are. Doesn't need to be extremely elaborate and weird. What if we bypass both and we play them then with active? Hear the difference. This is quite nice, I gotta say. And there's a lot of artists I've worked with that design a lot of bass tracks and then find out they might be too much or clashing together, and they have to make choices later on in the mixing phase. Now, sometimes you might be wrong on the other side, like you carb things too much. There's a certain beauty in out of phase bass when done, in a sort of a deliberated way and conscious way. But oftentimes it just doesn't push enough energy into your average speaker room, listeners, audience, environment, and whatever. So it can be too much. I think it was too much for the sake of our example, so I kind of leveled that. But the two things kind of sound way cleaner now. I would be okay if, the artist I'm working with would say like, well, now they kind of lost a little bit of poetry. It's true, but for our intents and purposes, it really, really made the two tracks work. We could do that with EQ, but this was fairly fast and we only used 5 bands, which I encourage you to do, just because I don't want you to just get fixed at 5 bands, but it's a great way to start, right? While 26 is incredibly defined, but if you draw them, maybe, would be nice. So this is quite cool. We're gonna add the Poly61 and we're gonna try and hear what Poly61 can do on 24 dB's range and see where we can add stuff. I want to hear it in solo first. This is the rubbery sound. Okay, where is this rubbery part? Okay, I would say it's these two bands, band 2 and 3. And let's see where we are with this. We might need to sort of push the output at first. So we're gonna play Poly62, Sam So with Poly61. We wanna get the rubber part, we don't wanna get the bass. It works. I haven't tried it. This is the first time I'm doing it. The principles, however, are behind what we did with the real mix. So I know the roles these plugins, gotta have compared to what we used with the analog outboard or when we were playing the EQs that were there in the outboard, for sure. But this is kind of effortless and it's so clean in a good way, like it's not feeling processed, right? Now, PPG bass has that, what was like the bell-like sound. sort of a bell-like, but different somehow. So let's instantiate these here and try and see where we want to go with this. Again, it might be a little bit low, so I like to go 24 anyway. I'm gonna play this. What do we want to have from the PPG? These are two nice parts anyway. Maybe they blend with the rubber, maybe not, but that's clearly where I want to be. So I'm gonna try and do the same. And you hear those subdivisions, right? It helps keeping the pace up because sometimes the other bass tracks play longer notes and this one actually has, shorter intervals and like faster pace. So it plays nice. It helps sustaining where the bass is not actually playing, which is cool. Then there's a CS80, not a hardware one, this was a plugin. But I want to use this because I remember this would be the all-in pad somehow. Like this is a really busy patch. And I want to play these against the drums and the bass we just designed as an exercise and try and carve some space for bass and other stuff in here. So first off, this one sounds like this without anything. It's uncompressed. Clearly, I think the outboard we had, whether it was distressors or stuff, were kind of leveling the sound, but it's okay anyway. And it's got its lows, sometimes they disappear, do other stuff. So what if we play the whole bass track through this? It's kind of a mess, right? I mean, it's so busy, it doesn't quite help. So what we could do is, because these all go to all bass, or at least they should, let me double check. Yes, they all go to my all bass bus. I could instantiate EQuivocate, because remember, the game is we must only use EQuivocate. So now we have the EQuivocate for the whole bass sound and our EQuivocate for the actual CS80. So for this example, I want to try and do it in two ways. I want to carve some space in the CS80 to let the bass play. We're going to listen to it again, understand why they're a little bit muffled or playing one against the other. And we're going to try and find areas that we can sacrifice on the CS80 in order to make the bass poke through as much as possible. Then we're going to copy the settings from the CS80 to the all bass bus. And we're going to reverse the range. We're going to go from positive ranges to negative ranges. So this will effectively invert the intervention that we had on the CS80 on the bass bus. It could work. The other way around would be using match EQ. So we try and match one track to the other, and then we flip the range in order to make them sound different. We could try that as well. And it's a good exercise for learning the match EQ on EQuivocate. I'm thinking the manual way would yield better results, but we're gonna try with that anyway. So I'm gonna play both with nothing active so we can hear what's wrong. Then we're gonna instantiate the EQuivocate on both plugins, but I'm gonna only work on the CS80, try and find room for the bass, right? So let's try this. It's almost there. I think there's an area here around 3K, which could help let the bass out even more, you know. So let's try this again, and then we're gonna match it. That part, the 1.3, 1.6 kilohertz actually had a better result by going there. Remember, those tiny little movements are already -2, -3.5, so it's quite a lot. But we've added more 678, which actually is an area I like for pads and stereo synths. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna copy this setting on the all bass. So what we did on the CS80 goes on the all bass, and then we're gonna reverse the range or invert the range, and this is gonna be actually negative, so we're getting a specular sort of intervention. So to do this, we do copy settings, which is here, and we paste them here. But then we change the range to negative. If I go -12, which is exactly the opposite of 12, which I have on the CS80, you're gonna see that the curve is the same, but look at the numbers. My -2 on the 1369 Hertz is actually +2 here, right? So if I go 0, everything is gonna be, if I actually type 0, everything's gonna be 0. This is a super, super nice way for me to use this plugin to sort of work by compensating stuff. The curvature is the same, but the range of intervention is now set at 0. So we have everything ready, but the scale is from 0 to 0, so nothing will really happen. The lower we go by dragging the mouse down, the more we allow those physical movements in pixels of the screen to become a scaled value of my range, right? So I can go up to -12, at which point I will have 100% the opposite of what the CS80 has. If I go past that, like -24, I have 200% more, right? Against what we did. If we go +6, we're gonna have half towards the same direction. You get the gist, right? It's really, really nice. So we're gonna start from 0, we're gonna play it, and I'm gonna go down in the range, so we're doing the opposite in the different areas. And because this is a male scale, we talked about it in the beginning, this is where our hearing perceives the hotspots of our skill in discerning tones and sounds. This could really, really be a natural way to let the bass speak through the keys. And it could be a bass work that you want to do, like you do these only on basses. It could be a mastering situation with stems, for example, vocals against instrumentals. Sometimes you do that. Can be done in many different ways. We're doing it with synths against bass, which is nice and fun. It's subtle, and it's, I double checked at first, like, is it active? But then you kind of get that feeling, a feeling that the bass is pushing through. One thing I wouldn't want the bass to do, for me in this case, would be for the subwoofer to push a lot. So I'm gonna draw it again here, or I could completely disable the bands, for example, up until band 4, and so they will not operate. Honestly, I'm fine with just keeping it somehow in the minus area, so it gets bumped a little bit. But again, you have this dot, which will disable the gain. So, EQuivocate will not work in that area and will completely leave it alone. Again, mastering situations might be useful. You keep everything at 0, instantiate only the band you want, and work in the male scale where our hearing, works best or feels it as more natural. So I'm gonna try it again, find a sweet spot. works. How was it before? It works. It really works. And there's a phase coherence now that completely solved the issue of the tracks by themselves. Now, we did this differently. This was done years before Newfangled Audio probably even existed. Definitely EQuivocate wasn't out yet, so we have that excuse. We couldn't do this. We had to rely on outboard. But this is convenient, it's fast, it has many possibilities for mastering. It's really quite something. You heard it. It's like nothing and everything changes all at once. That's why I call them next-gen plugins. They're different than, from other analog-like emulations. So now what we're going to do, we're going to instantiate the drums, maybe play a Prophet track or whatever, try and do the same, maybe match or go against some matching, and then we're going to wrap it or maybe use it on the entire song and try and find some areas where we want to fine-tune it. So, drums. Let's play the drum track and let's try and find it here on the mixer, instantiate this, go reset gains, and try and play this with our usual 5 bands. Let's try and see if we can work bass, CS80, and drums, again, to make it work in a complementary way. Volume is creeping up. Yes, we went a little bit louder, for sure. But sounds better. I still have headroom because I gain stage things properly. Okay, now we're going to use the Prophet and one of the Moog tracks. Let me find out. The Prophet sounds like this. And Moog 1 sounds like this. All right, let's try the 2 of them together. Okay, so as an exercise, let's instantiate EQuivocate on both the Prophet and the Moog, but we're not gonna use it on the Moog just yet. We're gonna use it on the Prophet, but I want to instantiate also a sidechain. So I'm gonna go here in Nuendo's sidechain source. I'm gonna add Moog 1, and I'm okay with it post fader. Doesn't really matter for this example. And now this is going to listen. So the Prophet track of EQuivocate will listen to the Moog and try and match what's missing, in the Prophet track to compensate for it, right? And make it sound alike. So you instantiate match EQ, you make sure your track plays. I'm gonna show you here in the send returns, it's being sent to my Prophet track. You can see it here. And when I press play, the Moog track should influence EQuivocate to make the Prophet match the sound of the Moog, if that makes any sense. So let's try this. So first off, you see it's really nice that as long as Match EQ is turned on, it's in real time getting handled. So nobody prevents you from keeping it live so that EQuivocate just matches that. In post-production, when you have different speakers not sounding quite right in the same room, this could be a lifesaver for hours and hours of work. But we're here to do music, not boring post-production. We don't need to pay the bills. So now that I have the Prophet and the Moog sort of scaled one against the other, because what I see on the Prophet means that I need that curve to get closer to what the Moog sounds like, I can work my game of opposites. I could obviously sidechain the Prophet into the Moog and do the same and kind of rematch, but I could also do copy, paste, and instead of plus 24, go 0, and then try and kind of go maybe minus 24. So what I'm going to do is actually, we're going to play this game. I'm going to go bypass, so the active button's off. I'm going to press play. We're going to listen to them, and then I'm going to engage the EQ on the Moog. Because match EQ is off on the Prophet, we're no longer matching. Whatever we snapshotted, it's going to be there, right? So let's try this. Could be a complementary way of, again, making two sounds work, or not. Let's try it out. Okay, so that's a lot for sure. It gains a lot of bass, probably in this area. So I'm gonna try and disengage this and try and see. It gets darker, maybe it's too much, we don't know, but let's try and keep going. Okay, so the subwoofer part's getting addressed, and now it's kind of getting interesting. I'm back at 0. I'm gonna try and go to minus 24. It's definitely better. I heard a sweet spot while I was passing from minus 24 to 0. Let's try it out. You see, with a little bit of retouching, we're kind of there, but I gotta be honest with you, the automated part made sense. Maybe it made too much rational sense, not a lot of musical sense, or I didn't want them to be exactly the same but opposite. Anyway, it gets you more than in the ballpark, and now we're gonna try and play these with drums. Then I'm gonna add our basses, then I'm gonna add the CS80, and if there's something wrong with both of them, we're gonna try and play these. Now, if these two tracks were going, and they do, to the same bus, which is all harmonies, we can actually instantiate an equivocate here. And then have this to offset any difference between the Prophet plus Moog, which is now one thing, it's now one box, we can't touch it anymore, and the rest. So drums, our bass structure, and the CS80. It feels to me as if this would be kind of balanced for the rest, but I might be wrong. Let's add bass. It demasks itself, right? We can do the same on the bass bus. Now, CS80. So you see, it just took me a little bit of retouching and the parts are blending together. There's no clashing anymore. If anything, they're even too much blended together, which is a nice thing because now in this arrangement, the Prophet and Moog, how we made it, they could be lead parts, but they're actually not, they're just supports. So they're really nice, they add to it, and if I played and mute the Prophet and Moog, you'll hear all of a sudden there's this hole in the mix, right? But when they're on and you get used to them, these parts are really blended in. And I remember a lot of records I love from 70s and 80s with lots of synths. They actually get very hard to transcribe because the synth sounds and the mixing and the arrangement, they're all so well done together that it's sometimes very hard to hear how many things are in there, right? It feels, again, as one. So let's try and play it, and then I'm gonna bypass the Moog and Prophet. I think they really feel that part in the center, which you would think it's very narrow and hard to fit in, yet, it does with 7 bands against 26. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take one last step, instantiate equivocate on the mix bus, and we're just gonna try and solo some areas. The way I would probably try and use it in a mix scenario, not just mastering, like suppose you're done and you think it sounds fine, but maybe you want to explore some areas in which things are a little bit obnoxious or something like that. It happens with synths oftentimes. So maybe the range could go as low as 6, but I'm going to start with 12 and then maybe de-emphasize that. So active, output to auto, input at 0. We're just going to play the same part. I'm going to solo some bands of the 26. I'm going to try and find some that are somehow really obnoxious. I don't know if that's gonna make any sense. I found one right away, maybe because it's 7K.3, famous for, hurting people's ears. So this could be one. Let's try and find maybe 2 more. We only have 3 in total. This game doesn't allow us to pick, more than 3. Okay, 3.9, also by looking at the output meters, it's kind of off the charts there. And then well, luckily we don't have 3 bad bands. The mix was good. But I'm gonna try the 200 because I know it's kind of a problematic area in a lot of rooms and stuff. So 218, we said, then 3.9, and then 7.3. I'm gonna just probably attenuate some. I'm actually gonna boost them. Let's hear them even worse than they are. You hear the masking, right, of them. So now we're pushing them 8.0 on a plus 12 scale. If we go 0, we're now doing nothing at all. And if we go minus, we're slowly taking those 3 hotspots in the mel scale of natural hearing for human beings, and we're going to attenuate them to hear, the mix up until it feels a bit easier to understand. If these are really problematic points, we are going to make it possible for the listener to enjoy the arrangement better just because we're demasking the actual spectrum. So I hope it works. You hear how weird that is, right? Now, when it was working, I was at around -2 something, right? -3 range. Look at the numbers on the actual faders. -2.1. This is a lot. Your hearing is going to perceive that there's a notch in them, and it sounds like one. sounds like 3 of them. So, we did such a high intervention there on the 3, it was +9, that we don't need to go that high. If you do need that, probably have worse problems. So from 0, I'm gonna go lower. I kind of felt a sweet spot where it wasn't feeling processed, yet it was a little bit easier. So let's try that again. I would say from -1 to -2, it feels okay. And it's already a lot. I mean, it's a -1 notch on a mix bus. But yet it kind of feels very, very natural. So up until a certain point, then it sounds dephased, right? Okay, so this will be set probably at, I don't know, I'm gonna try it again. I agree with myself that -1.0 is fine, just because it takes away some of the vibe of the music. It becomes a little bit too dehydrated, but it's a little bit easier. And it would be hard pressing to find anybody who says like, I don't feel it as good as it was before. It's a little bit leaner. And remember, this is only, 7 tracks and change against 24, 26. So once the arrangement's done, there's gonna be probably more build-ups. So I hope this works for you, and it concludes everything I had to say on EQuivocate. Thank you very much for tuning in.